This is from our camera reporter in Miyagi. And it looks like the tsunami has engulfed several cities.
On March 11, 2011, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Japan. What followed was one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern history. A tsunami so powerful it swallowed entire towns and left nearly 20,000 dead. But in the aftermath, something strange began to happen. In the hardest hit regions, survivors began reporting encounters with the dead. Not just in memories or dreams, but in taxi rides, in puddles of rainwater, on street corners, ghosts, and not just a few. It was so widespread that academics began publishing journal articles about it. Monks were called in to perform exorcisms. Survivors swore they saw the faces of lost loved ones, wet, cold, and still wandering. This is the story of the ghost epidemic that followed one of Japan's most devastating disasters. Before a tsunami strikes, there's always silence. Then it happens. By the shoreline, you see the ocean retreat. The sea pulls back far beyond the usual tide, revealing dark stretches of seabed, fish flapping where water once was. Some people walk toward it, others simply stare. There's a sense of calm before the devastation. Then the water returns, with a vengeance. At 2:46 p.m. local time, a magnitude 9.1 undersea megathrust earthquake struck 70 kilometers off the coast of the Oshika Peninsula in Japan's Tōhoku region. It lasted 6 minutes. It moved the island of Honshu by 2.4 meters and shifted the Earth's axis by an estimated 10 centimeters. What followed was one of the deadliest tsunamis in modern history. Waves, some over 40 meters high, struck Japan's northeastern coast. In cities like Rikuzen Takata and Minami-san-Riku, entire neighborhoods vanished. Inland, the water reached as far as 10 kilometers. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant suffered catastrophic failures. In total, over 470,000 people were displaced. More than 120 designated evacuation sites were overwhelmed by the water. Over 19,000 people died. More than 2,500 are still officially missing. The destruction wasn't limited to buildings or infrastructure. In the days that followed, it became clear that the social and emotional toll would be just as severe. Traditional mourning practices, especially cremation, couldn't be followed. Crematoriums were at full capacity. In many places, the dead were buried in temporary mass graves. An act that left many families feeling that proper respect had been denied to their lost loved ones. Entire communities had been wiped off the map. Survivors were relocated to makeshift shelters, separate from everything that felt familiar. Towns were quiet, roads unrecognizable. Life didn't just stop, it changed shape completely. And within that silence, something else began to surface. People began sharing experiences they couldn't quite explain. Strangers in soaked clothing seen standing at empty intersections. Doorbells ringing at homes no longer standing. Taxi drivers reporting passengers who vanished mid-ride. What began as scattered accounts soon became something else. Documented, reported, and taken seriously. Not just by locals, but by journalists, religious leaders, and academics. The months following the tsunami saw what is now considered the most extensively documented case of mass ghost sightings in modern history. In time, the phenomenon became known, informally and in academic circles, as the ghost problem. In Ishinomaki, one of the hardest hit cities, people began reporting strange sightings. Taxi drivers reported passengers climbing into their back seats, giving precise addresses in neighborhoods that had been completely swept away. But by the time the drivers arrived, the back seat was empty, the meter still running. Pedestrians described seeing figures in heavy winter coats, dripping wet, standing motionless at intersections in devastated neighborhoods. When approached, the figures seemed to dissolve into the night air. Residents heard doorbells ringing at destroyed homes, knocks echoing at empty foundations. Some swore they heard voices calling out for family members, even though entire households had perished. The fourth episode of Netflix Unsolved Mysteries, titled Tsunami Spirits, explores these reports. The documentary highlights first-hand accounts from residents who believed they encountered the dead in the days and weeks following the disaster. Sociologist Yuka Kudo, then a graduate student at Tōhoku Gakuin University, set out to study the phenomenon. She interviewed more than 100 taxi drivers in Ishinomaki. 7 shared detailed accounts of passengers who disappeared during their rides. One story stands out. A driver picked up a young woman dressed in a heavy winter coat. She asked to be taken to Minimiyama, a district completely wiped off the map. When he told her the neighborhood no longer existed, she grew quiet before asking, almost to herself, "Have I died?" By the time he turned to look at her, the seat was empty. Other drivers recalled passengers who remained silent throughout the ride, only to vanish when the car stopped. In one case, a man gave an address in a destroyed neighborhood, but when the driver arrived, the back seat was empty. Yet the meter had recorded the entire fare. To Kudo and her advisor, Professor Kiyoshi Kanabishi, these stories simply couldn't be dismissed as delusion. They left a trace, like the running meters. They were consistent and eerily specific. One volunteer recalled walking past the ruins of an elementary school and seeing children at the windows, waving. She waved back, only to realize the building was nothing but a hollowed shell. By the time she looked again, the children were gone. For survivors, it wasn't just scary experiences. It was a heartbreaking reminder, as each encounter forced them to relive the loss of the loved ones they could never bring back. Religious leaders were soon overwhelmed. One Buddhist monk, Reverend Taiyo Kaneta, found himself performing ritual after ritual for families who believed their loved ones were still wandering. He was also asked to help people who claimed to be possessed. One man, referred to by the pseudonym Takashi Ono, began speaking in voices that clearly weren't his own after visiting the disaster zone. Only after Kanata performed a Buddhist exorcism did the man return to himself. Skeptics argued these were symptoms of grief, of collective trauma, but the sheer number of consistent reports and the intensity of the experiences made them impossible to dismiss. To many, it felt as though the tsunami had not only destroyed towns, it had unsettled something far more dangerous. The boundary between the living and the dead was no longer intact. But to understand what survivors were experiencing, you have to look beyond psychology or trauma. In Japan, death is never just an ending. It's a transition. And when that transition is disrupted, something darker takes shape. These spirits fit into a pattern that has existed in Japanese belief for centuries. They are called yurei, the restless dead. Yurei are not simply echoes or memories. They are thought to be souls torn from life too suddenly, too violently, to move on. Traditionally, they were depicted in white funeral garments, with long black hair falling over their faces, hands dangling lifelessly at their sides. They are said to drift, silently, without legs, bound to the place or the cause of their death. And most importantly, yurei remain in this world when proper rites are denied to them. They linger until they are acknowledged, until their suffering is addressed, or until a ritual gives them peace. The 2011 tsunami created the perfect storm for such spirits. Tens of thousands died in an instant. Crematoriums were overwhelmed. Bodies were buried in mass graves, some without names, some without family to mourn them. Ancestors' altars remained empty, with no offerings, no incense, no prayers. By tradition, this meant thousands of souls risked becoming yurei, adrift, lost, and angry. For many survivors, the figures they saw in the streets or in the back seats of taxis weren't random hallucinations. They were yurei, bound to the places they died, desperately trying to return home. As one monk put it, the tsunami didn't only wash away towns, it washed away the boundary between the living and the dead. Not all reports came from word of mouth. Some claimed the evidence was caught on camera. One of the most striking examples comes from live news coverage in Miyagi Prefecture as the tsunami swallowed entire neighborhoods. In the middle of the broadcast, as houses and cars were pulled into the water, a pale white mist seemed to rise from the rubble. It drifts unnaturally fast across the devastation, almost gliding above the wreckage before vanishing from sight. To some, this was a spirit torn loose by the disaster, a yurei caught in the act of wandering. To others, it was nothing more than smoke or vapor rising from ruptured gas lines. What made the clip unsettling wasn't just the shape itself, but the way it seemed to move with intent, as if following its own path through the destruction. Soon after, another video began spreading online. High-definition footage that many believed showed a ghost escaping the floodwaters. The clip quickly went viral, reposted across forums and paranormal websites. In it, a white figure appears to rise from the water, drift upward, and vanish over the roof of a building. But this one has been examined more closely. Bill's channel, a YouTube series dedicated to verifying viral footage, traced the clip back to its source. A man named Kenichi Murakami, who recorded the tsunami near the Okawa River. Analysts studied the footage frame by frame. Some concluded it was smoke venting from damaged gas lines. Others noted how the vapor seemed to pause and cling unnaturally to the roof. In the end, the mystery came down to perspective. From an alternate angle, the building's roof was shown to have an overhang. What looked like a ghost hovering was actually vapor slowing as it caught the air beneath the overhang. The video itself was real, but the spirit was not. Still, for those who lived through it, the technical explanation doesn't erase the deeper unease and trauma that they experienced. In 2023, a video uploaded by a Japanese taxi driver went viral, leaving thousands of viewers lost for words. The clip, taken from his taxi's onboard CCTV, shows him driving late at night on empty streets. At first, the back seat is vacant. But as the minutes passed, a dark figure of a woman begins to materialize behind him, slowly, faintly, until her outline is unmistakable. The driver insists he was alone when he recorded the footage. Some argue it's a clever hoax, pointing out the possibility of video manipulation. But because of the grainy, low-quality feed, it's nearly impossible to tell for sure. To believers, it looks exactly like it appears to be. A lost spirit, perhaps one of the many yurei still searching for a way home. What unfolded after the tsunami remains one of the most extensively documented cases of mass paranormal activity in history. The scale was unprecedented. Hundreds of survivors reporting the same kinds of encounters across multiple prefectures. Enough that journalists, academics, and religious leaders all took notice. To this day, the stories continue to haunt Japan. But what were they? Were these truly restless spirits, souls ripped suddenly from life, denied funerals, and left to wander? Or were they manifestations of grief, a collective psychological coping mechanism for a nation of mourning? The Unsolved Mysteries episode highlights both possibilities, showing how traumatic this experience is for survivors. One particular story that stood out was that of Kazuya Sasaki, a man who lost his wife and 2 daughters in the wave. His older daughter was found hanging from a tree. His infant daughter was discovered days later, buried in rubble. It took weeks before he could finally bury them with dignity. For survivors like Sasaki, seeing or hearing the dead wasn't just a haunting. It was an extension of grief so profound that it changed his life forever. Meanwhile, Reverend Taiyo Kanata, who lived 30 miles inland, conducted over 2,000 funeral services in a single month. He described it as a calling, an unending responsibility to help both the living and the dead. He constantly deals with people struggling with psychological or spiritual turmoil, most claiming to be possessed. Another case was that of a 25-year-old nurse known as Ami. She arrived shaking, her voice changing, her body thrashing as if overcome by forces our physical world could not comprehend. Over several weeks, Reverend Kanata performed ritual after ritual, eventually expelling more than 24 spirits said to have taken hold of her. Kansho Aizawa, a Buddhist priest and spiritual medium, survived the earthquake and barely escaped the tsunami. In the weeks that followed, she reported seeing the spirits of a group of deceased boys, wandering aimlessly as if still trying to find their way home. Today, Aizawa works with survivors to help them cope with the tragedy, guiding the living through their grief while offering comfort in the belief that the departed are still near. Though their experiences differ, what these survivors have in common is the weight of loss. For many in Japan, the tsunami did not end when the waters receded. It left scars that continue to shape their lives, whether through grief, memory, or encounters they still cannot explain. And also, the haunting of Tōhoku endures. To some, it is proof that the dead still walk among the living. To others, it is the mind's way of carrying unbearable grief. But more than a decade later, Japan remains unsettled. Its towns and people still shadowed by ghosts that refuse to leave.